It's a privilege and an honor to introduce Theo Badashi, my good friend and fellow traveler. We've been on the same journey, beginning in the master's program at PCC, working on the future of energy film, and then transitioning into our PhD program. And it's easy to love and admire Theo for so many reasons, but I especially love his commitment to activism, his willingness to delve into future thinking, his commitment to a just and interconnected society, and lastly, his really support for all of us inside and outside of the classroom. So thank you, Theo.
All right. Thank you, Missy. So, radical evolutionaries, spellcasting the new vision. It is really exciting to be amongst a room full of radical evolutionaries and to be having this conversation with all of you. And the concept of spellcasting, it's important right now. I think we are all a part of this community because we recognize that as our role as radical evolutionaries, we are here to embed ourselves in a new cosmological vision, a new cosmological relationship in order to essentially cast that vision out into the world. First of all, so it can transform us as individuals in community, and then so we can transmit that out into the planetary culture. And so that's going to kind of be the theme of our talk today. It should be fun. As Brian Swim says, our task before us is the creation of new cultural DNA for our species. That is a really big concept. That's a phenomenal concept. If we think about cultural DNA, essentially it's the psychic and cultural structure that brings forward the crystallization of different patterns, of different ways of being, of different ways of knowing, different ontologies, different relationships with reality. And one of the things that I deeply admire about the philosopher and cosmologist Brian Swim is that he really helps us to understand what it means to be in participation with community, and essentially what our place in history right now is, and how absolutely significant it is that we are part of this endeavor. I'm going to be laying out a few tenets of what I consider a new integral emerging worldview. I label it cosmohumanism because I haven't found a term for it yet within our community. Maybe that's a good term. Maybe we can find better terms. But for now, I think cosmohumanism is appropriate. So I'm going to talk about 5 major tenets of what I see as this emerging paradigm. The first tenet is a cosmos-oriented cosmology. My friend Brian Wheeler and others, we like to talk about this. One of the main things about this new way of being is that we are actually orienting ourselves in relation to the universe as a mode of being of the universe itself. It's a really phenomenal way to look at ourselves. And for me, that's definitely one of the most fundamental personal and phenomenological shifts that's occurred within me, is recognizing that I am actually not just an individual self with a bunch of other individual selves, but I'm actually the product of, or the manifestation of larger forces that completely transcend me altogether. That's really beautiful. Brian tells us that the same dynamics that created the galaxies created the stars and the oceans. Humans are these dynamics, brought into self-awareness, becoming now fully aware of our creative work. And that the universe was teleologically set to bring forth self-awareness. It just happened to come through humans. How cool is that? Like, we are here right now as this self-awareness. It could have been anybody. It could have been really intelligent raptors, as Brian has pointed out before. Maybe in other planets and other star systems, there is self-reflective intelligence that is taking on a completely different form. But right here, right now on this planet, we have this amazingly privileged honor and responsibility to be that self-reflexive, self-aware nature of the universe coming through the human form. So this comes to the second concept, or the second kind of tenet, which is a more expanded understanding of cosmogenesis, which is initially a Teilhardian term. Teilhard essentially defines it as the evolutionary phenomenon in which the universe is and has been in a continual process of formation since the beginning of time. Now, what's different about this worldview, as opposed to other maybe more scientific worldviews, is the expansion of that definition of cosmogenesis beyond just the physical evolution and the Big Bang that we're seeing. Richard Tarnas and others really bring this forward and define this, and of course Teilhard did an incredible job, beautiful job of defining this, as really two major components. The first being deep time, the first not being in order, but one of the components being deep time, which is really just the physical evolution of the universe that we've learned from modern science. I mean, how phenomenal is that we've learned, you know, this incredible physical story that has happened. The second being the nature of deep psyche, and this is really where a lot of that's emerging right now, that is one of the phenomenal gifts of this radical evolutionary community, is that we get to develop a new language, an accessible language for deep psyche. Of course, it's archetypal, transpersonal, unconscious, phenomenological, mystical, and intersubjective. You know, these two forces, deep time and deep psyche, coming together create a far more holistic understanding of reality than either of them being separate. As Richard Tarnas says in outlining different characteristics of a new axial age, the new age will be deep in and deep out, into the inner depths of the self and our relationship to the earth, and out into the outer depths of the cosmos. And from this understanding, this deep inward and deep outward, comes a completely new, what we could call a validification of all modes of being. And it's really an expanded reality beyond scientific materialism. And this is, for me, this is probably the most dramatic turn culturally, is expanding upon this conversation about what's valid, what is worthy of respect, what is worthy of recognition. I think that Ken Wilber has an interesting model, visually and in many ways applicably, in which essentially he looks at it from the four-quadrant and all-level, all-quadrant model, in which we are developing a deeper understanding of the subjective, phenomenological reality, and then the intersubjective, kind of relational, cultural reality, and then also having validity for the major areas of the scientific materialism, being the objective, single organism and its physical reality, and then the collective physical manifestations of these organisms. And what this brings forward is a larger validification of the diversity of being, of human and non-human realities. And we are in a place right now in which we can actually engage with, culturally engage with, phenomenologically engage with indigenous consciousness, traditional religious consciousness, modernist scientific consciousness, postmodernist, integral. And then beyond that, what's emerging is what Jeremy Rifkin, the philosopher and economist, would call the emergence of a global empathic civilization, in which through advanced technologies like the internet, humans are actually coming into contact with other forms of being and having an empathic connection with these beings. That's a completely different transformation from looking at organisms as if they're mechanistic and here to essentially serve humans. We are having an emotional and empathic relationship with them. And so this is expanding upon our total understanding with life and how it is that we engage with reality. As Richard Tarnas calls it, it's a democratization of the spiritual dignity of all beings. I love this phrase, to democratize the spiritual dignity of all beings. I think about this all the time. It really is, in one sentence, completely embodying a new position, a new relational position, in which we actually have love and empathy and curiosity and respect and honor towards all beings, with even the possibility that there's a spiritual nature to all beings, as complex as it could be. I mean, this is a really exciting shift in our relationship to it. And for me, this culminates in a new sense of participation, which I feel that was really activated within me through the work of Teilhard de Chardin, Thomas Berry, and Brian Swim. And it's a form of participation in which we are expanding our reality beyond the human, and how it is that we engage with reality beyond the prioritization of the human. I mean, this is a big collective ego readjustment that we're moving through. An ego death, an ego transformation. But the fruit of what it's bringing forward is absolutely revolutionary in regards to the course of our human endeavor. This genuinely is creating a new relational reality in which, again, we recognize the validity, the sacredness of life around us and act accordingly. The major conversation that we're seeing right now that a lot of us recognize is the conversation between the emergence of a more dramatic and destructive form of the Technozoic era, which really just looks at the Earth as a resource, an objectified resource that is to be used by a minority of humans. Those are Thomas Berry's words. Versus the Ecozoic, which experiences the Earth and understands the Earth as a living community to be participated with. Brian Swim writes that the movement into the Ecozoic is to move into alignment with Earth and the intelligence of the universe. This is really fundamental, because we're no longer just relying upon the significance of human intelligence and saying that we are the ones that have the prime intelligence, we are the ones to make ultimate decisions about the nature of how it is that we are to operate. Instead, through this relational phenomenological presence, we come to look to the universe itself as a guide, as the great guide, as the self that is manifesting through ourselves. Which brings to the fifth characteristic, a concept I've been working on which I refer to as technosophia. Technosophia, I consider an integral vision of technology in which we are aligning the human endeavor and our creative forces, the symbols that we create, the technologies that we create, with the intelligence of the cosmos itself. So with an intersubjective relationship with reality and essentially looking to the universe as our guide in the creation of our symbol systems and our technologies. So real quick, let me define technology in this sense. Technology, I look at it as the complexification of consciousness and matter to bring forth new realities. And for me, it includes everything from language, tools, symbols, art, ritual, religion, philosophy, yoga and meditation. Entheogens could be a technology. Of course they could. A technology of consciousness. Civilization itself could be maybe considered a social technology. Commerce, a manifestation of symbolic, social interaction. Computers, obvious technologies that we are using all the time. And I really want to expand that to even look at living organisms themselves as possibly being living technologies, being created by other organisms. So in that sense, maybe the Earth, in its own actualization process, is creating greater forms of complexification, greater forms of beauty, greater forms of diversity and communion in order for it to realize higher states of being, more powerful states of knowing itself. And so in that sense, if we tie that into, cosmogenesis, and we also tie that into the human being, a mode of being of the universe and of the planet, then maybe we are that self-aware, biological, living technology of the planet. I really want to expand our language so that we don't just reduce phrases like technology into particular purely scientific categories. I'd like to expand on a lot of these different things so we re-embrace what we consider the technological endeavor. That's one of the major elements of technosophia. What we see right now is essentially a massive conversation between two emerging paradigms. I consider these the two main paradigms that are presently inactive right now, but that are going to be really vying for cultural significance in the next 20 years, 50 years, and 100 years especially. Science is moving so fast right now in particular areas that I'm really wanting to see the consciousness movement and what I consider cosmohumanism to be moving at an equally fast rate in its own ways of being, in its own ways of blossoming. And that's something that I think that we are all here to participate in. So, of course, the significance of these two major paradigms, we could look at the first being scientism, and its more dramatic kind of manifestation in transhumanism. Now, really quick, I want to say, to a great extent, we are all transhumanists. So I also don't want to dirty up language by saying transhumanists are this or that. There's a whole wide spectrum of transhumanists. Transhumanists essentially define themselves as wanting to use technologies in order to transcend to greater states of consciousness and ways of being. You know, and again, there are, because it's a spectrum, the more kind of Ayn Randian objectivist form of transhumanism is the one that, in a sense, can be the most destructive, because it's magnifying the human ego to a place of ultimate power without relational contact with other living organisms. So, as a community, I see that our major work right now is to be offering a counterbalance in an eventual synthesis with really powerful movements like transhumanism, which are going to be the mainstream philosophical movements in the next 20 years, absolutely, when it comes to the scientific endeavor. You know, and so from the scientific perspective, scientific reductionistic perspective, we'll say it's an ego-I-oriented cosmology in which it's the human as the center of all relations, where I'm an objective self and I'm against this threatening world and universe, and everything that I create and I produce comes from that place of either defense or need to expand upon my individual being as a human. Even against all other humans, for that matter. If, you know, a lot of the Ayn Randian philosophy is that if your functionality is not worthy for me, then I can use you as I want, as I choose. If you know, and to me, that's not really something I feel like that we should be carrying forward as we venture forth into the universe and into other dimensionalities of existence. So again, the ego, death, rebirth, transformation is needing to occur. And so, you know, it's individual subject acting upon objects, this desire to conquer life and death through human technology, and looking at the universe that's dead and purposeless. I mean, that sounds like kind of a boring story. That definitely had a role in the evolution of humanity for us to come to where we are right now. The things that have been created from, you know, from scientific objectivism, scientific materialism, are absolutely incredible, and I think very important in the overall evolution of our planet. So in a greater integral perspective, I want to pay homage to them and give respect to them and hold them in an empathic, loving embrace, and not just ostracize ourselves from this larger scientific conversation that's happening right now. So to counter that with what I consider cosmohumanism, you know, again, it's a cosmos human-oriented cosmology in which I'm not just a person standing here, I'm actually a way of being of the universe that is serving its function also. And then so that leads to cosmos-centered Earth relations. All other beings that I come in contact with are all part of cosmogenesis, that have spiritual validity in their own being. You know, and this consciousness is relational, interconnected, in which we are all participating in a cosmic process. Subjects engaging with subjects, you know, again to use Thomas Berry's kind of framing, and a deep desire to understand life and death through technologies of nature, human and non-human, through plant medicines, through you know, transpersonal and holotropic states, and through communion with animals, through communion with plants. You know, the larger technological endeavor of the universe, and as it has manifested on this planet in human and non-human forms, is fully ours to engage with in an intersubjective way. And of course, you know, it's a cosmos relational ontology where the universe is alive and full of purpose. Let's talk about purpose for a second, because this is a little bit of a, this is kind of a, when we want to, you know, Brian Swim talks about this a lot too. You know, does the universe have values in itself, or are they being projected? You know, Richard Tarnas kind of initially introduced this conversation to me through Passion of the Western Mind. Another great philosopher that I really, really like, who is named Stephen McIntosh, he's done a phenomenal job of synthesizing the work of Richard Tarnas with kind of a post-Wilberian perspective. He's way into Teilhard, he's really into Alfred North Whitehead. I think he's a fantastic integral philosopher that we could engage with. He absolutely loves Rick Tarnas' work. His book, Integral Consciousness and the Future of Evolution, is a fantastic reference that heavily draws upon Tarnas' work. Steve McIntosh says, I will argue that the dynamic patterns of evolution reveal the presence of meaning, value, and purpose, and that purpose is actually an unmistakable message carried by the evolutionary process itself. He breaks this down into three main ways in which the universe is generating a sense of purpose and meaning. First, through value, intrinsic value as an individual organism, and instrumental value as how that organism operates. And as we develop complexification and communion, the value increases for all. He looks at creativity as a major characteristic. Alfred North Whitehead considered creativity the ultimate principle of the universe, beyond its physical manifestation itself, beyond the laws in which it's manifesting. The fact that it is creating is the foundational characteristic of the universe, which leads to development, the impulse for improvement and expansion, complexification, diversification, and that sort of thing. And Brian Swim tells us the universe is telling us its story. If we pay close attention, if we look at how the universe operates and manifests, it wants to tell us something. Maybe not as a conscious subject saying, hey, humans, let me tell you this, isn't this insane? But more like, this is how it is being, and we are, as the self-reflective nature of it, are able to look back and say, wow, that's how me, as a cosmic self manifesting as a human, is able to understand this larger being and how it wants to be. What is its story? What are its values? It values differentiation, which leads to self-actualization of the organism. It values communion, in which organisms come together and complexify through relation. And it values autopoiesis, which essentially is the self-organization of the individual organism, of individual ecosystems and how they relate to each other, of larger organisms like planets, larger, even celestial organisms like stars, and then of the universe itself as one great organism that we could call the self of all selves. Thomas Berry says the Earth itself would be seen as the primary model in architecture, the primary scientist, the primary educator, healer, and technologist, even the primary manifestation of the ultimate mystery of things. So when we approach our technological relationship to this reality, which is essentially just a crystallization of symbols, right? We're here to bring forward new DNA, a new symbol system through various forms of technology. If the universe itself is the one that's guiding us and teaching us, then we are actually going to be in alignment with with its own cosmogenesis, its own greater thrust towards complexification and actualization. And then I say, I'm quoting myself, this is inspired during one of the classes. I know it's kind of funny. I don't know why I would do that. I wrote this down during one of Brian's classes. Our future cultural impulse will be that of synthesizing the techno-scientific endeavor with a phenomenological unification with the psyche of the cosmos. I was really trying to explore a lot of Richard Tarnas' ideas with Brian's ideas. And to me, how phenomenal is that we can enter into these deeply phenomenological and cosmo-relational experiences and then come forward with new symbols and new visions and new forms of creativity through that. So this goes back to our task right now, and I have a few minutes to talk about this, so I'll make it succinct. Essentially, our task as radical evolutionaries is that we are here to be spellcasting. That is not a concept that should be anything that we should shy away from. We're here to crystallize our own consciousness as a part of a community of radical evolutionaries so that we can send a greater vision, embed a greater vision into the cosmic reality, into the noosphere of our planet right now. That is our task, I believe. And Brian says the challenge of our time is to create more vibrant symbols, to activate the human imagination. Activation of the imagination. That is exactly how we are going to be bringing about this new reality, through activation of these symbols. So our role is to go further into deep psyche, into deep time, further in and further out, as Tarnas says. As far as we can go in and out, and from that place to literally become an embodiment of the physical and psychic cosmogenesis of the planet. And from that place, we get to create a new set of symbols, a new set of technologies that will be harmonizing our entire collective morphic field of our planet. Tarnas did something really interesting in class one time where he put a lot of emphasis on this concept of attention and intention. And immediately he reminded me of something that I had learned when I was studying Hermetic philosophy, and that really puts emphasis on how it is that we create things in our reality. I call this the alchemical formula. When we refine our intention, right, so we have gone into these deeper post-rational or pre-rational states, as Thomas Berry calls them, and we are being informed by the dream of the earth. From this place, we have a new symbol system that is reflective of the evolution and cosmogenesis of our planet and of the universe. And then from there, through intention, through focused intention, we can absolutely crystallize that symbolic framework, that symbolic language. And then intention plus emotion times repetition equals manifestation. So once we have that beautiful crystallized intention, we infuse it with the passion of emotion, with the loving passion of emotion. Maybe it's not always love, maybe it's sadness, maybe it's this, maybe it's that. Whatever is being drawn forward that is asking us to experience it, we can draw upon that emotion, and it's that emotion that brings the fire that crystallizes and actually animates those intentions that we create. And repetition. How many times did the earth go around the sun until all this blossomed forward? It's all about repetition. It's all about repetition. The more we can crystallize this language, even in the conversations we have with our family, with our friends, in the posts that we put out on the internet, in the videos that we create, in the books that we write, in the lectures that we give. It's all about repetition and crystallization, drawing upon those symbols, infusing it with the fire of our emotion, and then doing that often. And really, as Brian has reminded us, don't just get up and teach. Share your passion and your love with people. That's going to be the emotion and the fire that actually awakens it within other people. I say that the central dream narrative of the spellcaster and the associated spell codes embedded into the noosphere align with the archetypal patterning of the universe to activate the psychic energetic forces that bring forth the cultural reality of the population. The dream narrative. We understand this. We know what we're delving into. When we embody this dream narrative and we infuse it in alignment with archetypal forces, with a recognition of the patterning of archetypal forces, we can actually send this into the noosphere in ways that will be so much more dramatically magnified than if we did not have awareness of the archetypal forces and also of our relationship to serving as a channel and a vehicle for them. So this brings me to my last statement that I really wanted to share, and it's a bit of a summary of the previous statement. The sum total of one's essence is fractally contained in that which one creates. This was a message that was given to me during some very profound holotropic states many years ago. So the further we go into these deeper realities, the further out we go into the cosmos, the further in we go with ourselves, that becomes us. That reality becomes us. And then it is literally fractally infused into everything that we create. We did this with our film, with The Future of Energy. We took cosmological ideas and we put them in tangible form while completely infusing it with a new cosmology. That's just one of many. Drew Dellinger does a phenomenal job everywhere he goes with bringing that dream narrative and casting those spells and really infusing that higher consciousness into the noosphere as it's a fractal representation of his own transformation. So as we transform as a community, we will see that the more we crystallize that and the more we articulate it through repetition and the more passion that we share in the work that we do, the more that this vision will actually embed itself into the larger global psyche. And so in the last moment, I want to say, it might sound like I am putting a little bit of fire under this, because I am. We don't really have a lot of time in regards, cosmically, I don't know. Time is just, but in this moment right now, when we're looking at human transitions, I'm hoping that I can help excite all of us, and that you can help excite me, and that we can work in communion with each other to stay excited, to stay engaged, and to recognize that our task is absolutely fundamental to essentially saving the human species and so many countless other living organisms, living communities that are in relation to us, that are being deeply impacted by the things that we're doing. And so if it sounds like there's a fire coming through me right now, that is your fire. That's the fire that you are activating within me and that you are embodying with me. And so in closing, I would just like to say, let's be excited. let's bring this fire forward with excitement, with joy, with a little bit of playfulness, and let's not lose sight of the fact that we are literally redesigning a new reality for, at the very least, Western society, and in engagement with indigenous cultures, for maybe this will eventually lead to a whole global culture that we can all participate in mutual respect, in mutual cooperation. And so I am just absolutely excited and thankful to be a part of this with you, and for all of us to be here as spellcasters, as radical evolutionaries, participating in this spellcasting of a new vision. Thank you. I went over time.
Take that on the road.
Yeah. Oh, thanks. Any brief comments or questions? Anybody? Maybe we can talk later. Matt.
Well, first of all, that was awesome. Oh, Mike, that one? Oh, this one. Go ahead.
Okay. That was brilliant. I loved all of it. You basically, you're talking about the same thing that I'm talking about tomorrow, which is not surprising. Crystallizing it in a slightly different way, but it's like,
yep.
I feel like you've absorbed so much of this vision, like, into an easily digestible and exciting form that makes it seem so clear what the way forward is. And yeah, like Rick said, take it on the road. Cool. I mean, you guys are doing that already, but keep going.
I mean, Esalen has been my great activator. The PCC community, Brian, Rick, Sean, Robert, obviously. But this Esalen has changed me. So it's very significant that I have had these revelations while being here, and that these have been crystallized within me in ways that would not have been possible otherwise. And so, yeah, and just in participation with all of you, just learning from you. I just learn from you all the time. I'm so inspired by all of you, So, yeah, thanks.
Two little things. What was that about Jeremy Rifkin and other entities? I missed that.
His ideas are phenomenal because he's just really a fantastic person, but he correlates the advancements of technology with different stages of consciousness. And that as new forms of media communication emerge, people have contact with other communities. And so, with the telegraph machine, with the telephone, and now with the internet in particular, people are engaging with the at least symbolic video and audio forms, but documentations of other beings, of animals, doing funny, beautiful, silly things. And we're like, animals have humor? I kind of like that animal, And then that immediately expands their sense of empathy. So what we're seeing right now is being a major part of this. I probably should have put empathic civilization, somewhere on the screen. But we are all participating in the emergence of a greater empathic civilization. And,
that's clear.
Yeah.
What about, the other thing was, is Ayn Rand, is she used by transhumanists as one of their central...
She's one of the fundamental philosophers that's influenced a lot of what I would call the more radical form of transhumanism. I really like a lot of the major characteristics of transhumanism, and I'm trying to find a certain balance. I don't want to be uploaded to a computer. I don't want to be, I love being human, but I really believe entheogens is a form of being transhumanist. The use of DMT, which has transformed my life dramatically, the scientific process that refined that to allow me to use it essentially puts me in the category of being a transhumanist. And so I think, again, I think the conversation between cosmohumanism, which I think we were all cosmohumanists to that extent, and transhumanism, it's going to have to be a synthesis of the two in a relationship, or else if this school of thought goes to the direction that it wants to without a counterbalance coming from all of us, it's not going to be the prettiest sense of reality. Superhumans that want to objectify everyone. Yeah.
So it's great you came up with a word. You have a word to articulate, to capture a variety that would be, in a certain sense, in polarity with transhumanism.
I've been studying a lot of transhumanism lately because they're such a dominant new ideology.
Last question is there anything that's not technology?
I think. Oh yeah. I think probably the thing that generates it. You know, the universe itself. I would not reduce it to being labeled a technology. I think a technology is a mode of expression.
Yeah, that's great.
Yeah.
The universe is in somebody else's hands.
Maybe. Yeah. Okay, I'll take one more question, then we can all. Thanks, Brian.
Do you have any idea or intuition of what like new symbols, what they might look like, or like what?
Well, you know, from my own experience, I have my original background was in activism, so I was used to dealing with, and that's kind of where I became more of an integral activist. I was used to dealing with all sorts of people that had very diverse perspectives, and somehow I was in a position to just not judge them, to just let them be. I had really strong conservative Christian friends, and I was, you know, my anarchist communist friends, and I had to find a way to create a language in which, you know, they could come together. And so, you know, for us, it manifested in the future of energy. We showed the diversity of people that are doing these phenomenal things. It seems like they're just installing solar panels and making community gardens, but in reality, they are localizing their energy and they're gaining a sense of local autonomy that is, you know, powering their lives and powering their homes. But also, they're, you know, one action leads to so many other actions. You know what I mean? So you install solar panels, and then before your neighbor says, "Hey, you do that? Oh, okay. Well, you know," that neighbor gets it then, and then those people end up going to farmers markets, you know, and then they might end up doing this and doing that. And that's one way to cause a shift, is to make it very, very literal and concrete. But I think there are so many symbols that have come through our community that need further elaboration that have already been activated by the major cultural activators within that are at the foundation of our community. And I think it's our responsibility as forces that are gravitating around these larger energy bodies to not just find a way to articulate their vision more clearly, but also to be activated by that vision and then find a new language for our own generation that is holding the essence of it, that's using their greater sense of experience and their greater insights, and then letting our own fresh new insights being activated from that and creating new symbolic language. I mean, you know, again, I think Drew Dellinger does a phenomenal job of bringing something like slam poetry, which is, you know, traditionally kind of more of a kind of like an urban street art, we could almost say, you know, that has very deeply street roots to it, and then articulating a cosmological language within that. You know, I think I just absolutely love his work. And so, yeah, it's going to depend on anything that's, whatever is drawing each of us towards passion, whatever is making us excited. That language and that symbolic representation and the technologies associated with it are going to be coming forward. So just trust in yourselves. Just go deep in and go deep out and just trust in yourselves, you know.
Thank you.
So, thanks. Thanks, everybody.